Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have with me once again, as we do almost every week, have with us Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Welcome, Daniel. Good to have you back.
Thanks for having me back, Jay. It's always wonderful to be with you.
Always wonderful to talk with you and to explore the many different, very interesting and very important articles at the Ron Paul Institute website. A couple that I'd like to talk to you about, or have you talk to us about, more accurately. One has to do with an interview that you gave on the Scott Horton show, titled, "Did the Ukraine Shoot Down the Plane?" Well, now, of course, we know, Daniel, those of us who watch the mainstream media know for certain, because our government came out within 24 hours and told us who did it. It was the rebels. It wasn't the Ukraine government by any chance. There's no stretch of the imagination. Why would you even suggest such a thing? That anybody but the bad guys, and that would be Putin and the rebels, were responsible for shooting the plane down. So talk to us a little bit about what did you tell Scott Horton?
Well, you're right. It's just sort of the anatomy of propaganda, isn't it? It was actually not even 24 hours, I don't think, before they started saying that Putin did it. He did it. Putin did it. They framed the issue, and now I'm sure you saw yourself all of the tabloid press. And also Time and Newsweek, they have these ominous photos of Putin on the cover saying, Putin's plane, and Putin shot down the plane. So it's not even the rebels. That's not good enough. It has to be Putin himself manning this gun. And all of this stuff that they shoveled out in the first few hours had the effect of framing the issue. Mm-hmm. And they did not feel compelled to follow it up with any evidence whatsoever. But just like, if you remember, Jay, back in 2002, well, everybody knows that Saddam Hussein was behind 9/11.
Right.
Because the media told us, 24/7 that he was behind it. He was involved in the planning. They never had to prove it. They just simply repeat the lie often enough. Mm-hmm. So this is what happened, and it really framed everything after that. Nobody questioned, okay, is there evidence? Why would he do it? Who benefits from it? It just becomes an established fact. And I don't think I certainly have not seen anything that's even remotely convincing, demonstrating that either Putin or the rebels did it. They may have, I don't know, but I certainly haven't seen any evidence. And I'm sure your listeners have been through this game before, and we know better than to listen to what the government says.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's so many precedents set here where, the big lies are told and we go to war as a result of it. So, I mean, certainly Iraq comes to mind first and foremost, perhaps. So what did you tell Scott Horton?
Well, I think there's a lot of interesting evidence out there that suggests, just as well as the U.S. government side, that suggests that that Ukraine itself shot down the plane. Maybe it was a false flag. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they did it on purpose to try to get sympathy. But what we do know is, certainly what we do know is that the head of the OSC observing mission, who was the first on the scene at the crash, he was interviewed on Canadian television at the end of the week last week, and he said, when we got to the plane, we looked at the fuselage, and gee, it looks like the fuselage has been hit with machine gun fire, with heavy machine gun fire. And they said, everyone asked me, have you seen any evidence of a missile? No, as a matter of fact, we haven't.
Huh.
So that's interesting.
What does that suggest then, if it was hit by machine gun fire?
Well, if you remember, right after the U.S. started blaming Russia for doing this, the Russian Defense Ministry held a very in-depth briefing. I think it lasted about an hour, where they basically came out and said, here is all the stuff that we have. This is the stuff we have from our air traffic controllers. Here's what we have from our radars, our satellites. And one of the things that the air traffic controller in Rostov had on his screen was the identifiable markings of a Sukhoi jet fighter ascending up toward the Malaysian Airlines jet just before the plane lost contact. So it was certainly within firing distance of the 30-millimeter cannon that it carries on board. The U.S. has not addressed that. It simply ignores it.
It ignores it. So the possibility then it was a Ukraine fighter that fired with machine guns from the air
and shot it down. There's a massive decompression if you blow up the if you blow up the cockpit. That's a
Sure.
possibility. There's something out there that would be of interest. There are also plenty of interviews with locals who said not only was this plane shadowed by a jet fighter, but it happens all the time that they basically, they use their military aircraft and they hide behind civilian aircraft to allow them access to some of these areas.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's untrue, but it's something certainly worth listening to.
Mm-hmm.
There was also a German aviation expert who wrote an article, and I don't have it in front of me, but wrote an article last week where he seriously questions the U.S. official position and leans toward the idea that there was a shoot down with machine guns at the plane, or in combination with a missile fire from the ground.
Mm-hmm.
But the U.S. Here's something interesting, Jay. The U.S. says we know now that the Ukrainian military, the Kiev, the people who the U.S. backs, we know that they are firing medium-range ballistic missiles with 1,000-pound payloads into rebel territory because we have detected the launches and we know this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if they have that capacity, then they would have the capacity to detect the launch of the Buk missile against the airline.
Mm-hmm.
They would be able to pinpoint it. They would be able to tell us exactly what they have.
Right.
Why won't they do this? Something as serious as this that may well result in something like World War III. Is it not serious enough to find some way to compromise your sources and methods and let the world know what you have? Tell their story. It would be very compelling. Why won't they do it?
Mm. Maybe someone wants World War III.
Maybe they do, or maybe the U.S. already knows that the Ukrainians shot it down and they're trying to cover for their allies because it would really blow the U.S. narrative out of the water if that's
absolutely, and rightfully so. It would.
And again, I'm not saying that that's what I believe.
Yeah.
Saying in the absence of anything convincing from the U.S. side, I'm willing to consider any possibility.
You're right. The U.S. isn't willing to talk or show evidence for their allegations.
If you remember, I don't know if you watch any of these State Department briefings, they've actually become somewhat comical.
Yeah.
But asked many times, the State Department spokeswoman, especially this woman called Marie Harf, she keeps referring to social media. They say, what's your evidence for this claim that Russia is moving heavy weapons into Ukraine for the rebels' use? Well, we've seen a lot of things on social media about it.
So that's our CIA. That's our intelligence
operator. How many
operator.
billions do we spend on the intelligence community? And the fact of the matter is, these guys aren't sitting around watching Twitter. We have, whatever you think about the covert side of the CIA, there are very, very many capable people on the analytical side who I'm convinced there's still plenty of good people left who are just not signing off on this,
Right.
And that's why they're being sidestepped. If you remember last year, Jay, the whole Syria poison gas thing, where the U.S. was ready to go to war with Syria over this idea that they shot sarin gas into the civilian population. It was the intelligence community, capital I, capital C, that refused to sign on to a sort of official intelligence community finding on this. Mm-hmm. And so the administration basically just sidestepped its own intelligence community and released what they called a government finding or something of this nature.
Yeah.
So it's certainly several steps below the official CIA or the official State Department intelligence or research view of what happened.
Yeah, well, I certainly do believe, Daniel, that, in fact, I was talking to someone yesterday who just had a tour. In fact, it was a pastor of a Lutheran church, and one of his parishioners was a high-ranking Pentagon person who took him for a tour of the Pentagon and the inner circles of the Pentagon. And from it all I can hear is that this is a very honest person who is really trying to do his job, his intelligence job for the United States. I share your view that the intelligence community has a lot of honest people that are really just trying to find out the truth. The problem is, it seems as though what the Pentagon or what the CIA comes out with, a lot of times, it seems like whatever the truth is sort of filtered based on the political needs of the moment. Would you agree with that idea?
This is nothing new. I mean, it happened certainly at least in the last administration, and I'm sure much before that. But I think you are seeing the real sidelining of people who, as you say, there still are honest people and good analysts in there. And I would question personally in my own morals whether I would want to to be in a job like that, but I think there are decent folks in there who are trying to do a decent job, but I think they're being sidelined. Nobody wants to hear this. And I personally, to be honest, without going in details, I know I have very good friends that were in the State Department that were simply drummed out of any analytical capacity because their objective analytical conclusions were not comporting at the time with those of the Clinton administration.
Right.
So it happens. It happens a lot.
And it seems to me that there's been a closer alliance since Hillary Clinton became, when she was Secretary of State, between the Defense Department and the State Department. Is that right? Is it perhaps you told me that?
That's a very good point too. You know, the State Department felt like it was missing out on a lot of the actions, so it really started taking on some of the traits and some of the activities of not only the Pentagon but also the CIA. So it became a much more active player in the so-called soft power, smart power, and all of these sorts of things. But they all have military terms. They use military terminology, and they use, military objectives. And so, yeah, there certainly is a militarization of diplomacy. And yeah, I would say Hillary definitely was one of the ones that started it.
And getting back to this notion that a lot of the intelligence that comes out of the CIA is ignored by the politicians when it doesn't fit their political interests. I mean, I keep thinking back about how Ron Paul said when he was running for president on the GOP primaries, when he said the reason they're over here on 9/11 is not because we're free, not because we're wealthy and so forth, but because we are over there. And that didn't come from Ron Paul. He didn't drum that up. That came from CIA reports. So
Sure.
Clearly, the inside the CIA, I just happen to believe that people are hired by the CIA. They get a nice job and all of that. And I would imagine, like a lot of people running for political office too, when they first enter the arena, they really want to do something good. But then a lot of times they're told, if you want to survive in this job, this nice job you have, you better start saying what we want you to say. But in any event, another very interesting article, Political Purges Loom as Ukraine Falls Apart, that you wrote, Daniel. I mean, actually, it was more to do with a video, I think, that you commented on. I think it was John Laughlin. Is that who?
Yes.
Yeah,
John is one of our academic advisors for the Ron Paul Institute, and he was interviewed about the sort of fight between the president of Ukraine, the recently elected president after the democratically elected president was overthrown. He had a big fight with Parliament because he wanted to declare emergency in the East and really start declaring martial law and cracking down, and he wanted also to have them officially termed as terrorists in the East, and he had some resistance in Parliament for that, and so he erupted at Parliament and said he's going to dissolve Parliament because it's full of a bunch of fifth columnists, And what's interesting, and John pointed this out, is that the whole impetus behind the Euromaidan, all of these protesters who were all for democracy,
right?
Their whole point was we have to reduce the power of the presidency. We've got to get this guy Yanukovych out because he's just a dictator, and we will now return to the 2004 Constitution, which gave more power to the Parliament. Mm-hmm. Well, when the smoke clears and people are back in their offices, now we have a President Poroshenko who's even stronger than Yanukovych. So the unitary executive is much stronger now, to the point where he just says, I'm going to dissolve you. He already outlawed the Communist Party, essentially. Mm-hmm. They used a parliamentary trick to destroy the Communist Party faction. The word Communist Party doesn't appeal to you or I, Jay, but what they are is the opposition, and the only remaining opposition party in Parliament. So it's obviously very significant on the eve of elections if you outlaw your opposition, right?
Yeah.
If it were any other country that the U.S. didn't like, it would be, you can imagine the pressure they'd be putting on Ukraine or any country, by outlawing the opposition.
Well, those politics sound an awful lot like the politics of Washington as well. When Bush was in office, the Democrats wanted to see his power curtailed and Congress have more power. But once their guy got in, they certainly didn't want to take away power from President Obama. So
Exactly.
it's same old, same old. I mean, it's just like not playing with an even playing field, but trying to cheat your way into power and prosperity, I guess, rather than letting the markets determine
Yes.
what is going on. So is this government that we have established now? I take it then it may be in trouble.
Well, it's in trouble because they've used every penny they have to fight this war against the people in the East who simply want to secede. They don't want to be part of this government in the West. Historically they've been part of Russia until relatively recently. Some of them want to return. A lot of them want to just be independent of Kiev in the West.
Sure.
But they've spent every penny they have fighting this war, and they have nothing left. The only thing they're facing is IMF and austerity, and the sort of you know very well the top-down approach of the IMF, which has a pretty nasty track record. So there's they have no real protectors in the West. I think the U.S. likes the idea of having Ukraine in its camp, but it doesn't want to foot the bill of what it will cost to keep Ukraine from becoming a complete failed state.
Yeah.
However, if you look at things like the energy sector, I think we talked about this last time, maybe Jay. The vice president's son, of course, is on the board of the largest energy company, which is reputed to be owned by a Ukrainian-Israeli oligarch who's a billionaire. So the elites will make out just fine, but the rest of the place, well, they have the sort of the Libya scenario to look forward to.
Well, the elites will make out just fine, but I would imagine the elites want to keep their economic interest in place, so I suppose they can get us taxpayers to help keep shoveling money into the system to keep the faltering Ukrainian government alive.
Yeah, to keep the people from getting too upset. But most of these people do have passports elsewhere, the U.S., other places. So if it really gets nasty there, they'll continue to take the money out, but they won't have to deal with the unpleasantness.
Take the money and run. I wonder where they can go these days, though, since our government seems to be forcing Switzerland to crack down on everybody in that country. But I'm sure that the powers that be, the ruling elite, will make sure that their friends in the Ukraine are taken care of if that place really implodes as well. But such is the real world we live in.
Yeah. Well, having the vice president's son on your board is kind of an insurance policy, isn't it?
Yeah, I would guess. I mean, it's crony capitalism or fascism, I would call it. Not being polite about it. It is what it is. Governments and corporations in bed together and to overturn the free workings of the marketplace is what our government, I believe, is increasingly all about, and seemingly our empire, really, that's going around the world, gobbling up territory and resources and so on and so forth. But anyway, Ron Paul wrote an article on your site as well. Why won't Obama just leave the Ukraine alone? Yeah, why don't you just leave the Ukraine alone? I think maybe we just possibly touched on that with what you just said about the economic connections that our ruling elite has in the Ukraine. But maybe address a little bit what some of Ron Paul's points in his article, dated Sunday, August 3rd.
Sure. Well, the main point really is about this latest round of sanctions that the U.S. has placed on Russia, and as you know, it targets the financial, military, arms, and the energy sectors. So it means if you wanted to rush out and buy your AK-47, it's going to be a lot trickier to do that now because the U.S. has forbidden the importation of Kalashnikovs into the U.S. now, amongst many other things.
Yeah.
The European Union, of course, being good lapdogs, jumped on board immediately, even though it's absolutely contrary to their interests. You have little sort of Shih Tzu dogs like Poland, and its Foreign Minister Radek Sikorski beating his chest on CNN about how these sanctions are going to really hurt Russia.
Yeah.
And who they're going to hurt? They're going to hurt average Polish people who get 90% of their energy imports, their gas imports from Russia. 90%. Wow. So wait until October. And trust, I've been in Warsaw in December. You want to have a good supply of natural gas. So of course, people like Sikorsky, they won't they won't suffer, but most of Poland will suffer from the chest beating of the sort of wannabe major powers like that.
Yeah. Well,
And it'll hurt our economy. It'll hurt Europe's economy. Anytime you curtail trade, it's terrible. It's terrible for the economy.
Yeah. No, it is, and already I can't remember which major U.S. corporation was already talking about tempering their profit expectations as a result of this. It's going to hurt. The interesting thing, of course, is that the downing of that plane really turned the political sentiment of Europe more towards aligning with the United States on this issue.
Funny how that works, isn't it?
Yeah. So we get back to the issue of who benefited from this whole shooting down the plane. It certainly wasn't Putin and the so-called rebels.
And what Dr. Paul points out in his column is really this latest round of sanctions is predicated on the idea that Russia shot down the plane, or at least created the conditions for the shoot down of the plane, and that Russia is transferring heavy weapons to the rebels in eastern Ukraine, neither of which have been proven at all by the U.S., neither of which had even been attempted to be proven by the U.S.
Yeah, I remember, Daniel, going all the way back when technology wasn't nearly what it is now during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we were given pictures on our television. I don't know what they really meant, because when we saw supposedly the missiles leaving Cuba, we saw the ships leaving with tarps over top of the missiles or whatever. But the point I'm trying to make is that we were given some sort of aerial vision of the enemy and stuff of things that were being moved around, military equipment and so forth. We're not seeing any of that now from our government, are we?
Sure, and that was what 52 years ago, and yet you could tell in the photographs that were provided, at least the untrained eye would say, okay, that makes sense. That looks like what they were saying.
Mm-hmm.
But 50 years later, imagine 50 years of technology later, and they put out these grainy pictures that were provided from some private satellite service that don't look like anything at all, and they say, see, this is what we mean. Here it is. Here's the smoking gun.
Right.
And,
It's laughable, except I think most people don't have time to think that far about it. Yeah, I mean, at a time when you can take a satellite photo and capture a quarter on a sidewalk and be able to see the definition of that quarter, the details of it from so high up, to think that we don't have the ability now to provide what the Russians are asking us to provide. They said, look, we've shown you yours. We've shown you ours. Now you show us yours, and nothing, no interest from our point of view. I guess the propaganda machine is working so well that why do they need to tell the truth, right? Why do they need to document what you say, what they're saying?
Sure. I mean, if the stakes weren't so high, fair enough. But the stakes are extremely high here.
Yeah.
So it's.
Yeah, I mean, some people are suggesting, some knowledgeable people, that this is this is one of the most dangerous times we've faced, as dangerous as those of the Cold War. So, I don't know, Daniel. We have to keep trying. Anything else you'd like to add today? Any other issues that there's so many articles. I see there's an article called "We Tortured Some Folks." Obama admits the United States committed acts of violating federal and international law, but it seems as though he's not willing to punish anybody.
Yeah. So how do you have the rule of law when people that violate the law are punished?
They go scot-free, and not only our law but international law. We
and you know what's something that really will sicken you, Jay, is all of these people who did the torturing are going to get off scot-free.
Yeah.
But the one person who blew the whistle and said, "Hey, the CIA is torturing some folks," and that's John Kiriakou. He's languishing in jail for years and years and years. So here's the guy who blew the whistle on the torture. He's in the slammer. The people who did the torturing, impunity.
That's incredible. Of course, you know why. That goes right to the top. It goes right to the White House.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so evil. What's going on in this country now is so evil, and Americans need to stand up. My wife says to me, and I understand very well why she says it, she says, "Jay, what can I do? I'm one person." And we have this overwhelming mainstream media that keeps pounding away, and I talk to my friends, and they don't really want to hear about it. They don't really want to know about it. But I just showed her, Daniel, I said, there's this article that I just picked up, actually another C-SPAN exposure. C-SPAN helps Richard Gage blow the whistle on criminal cover-up of 9/11. So enough people wrote to C-SPAN and said, we think not enough answers, truthful answers are coming out of the 9/11 investigations. Lots of questions that haven't been answered. We want you to get on Richard Gage to talk about the scientific evidence that there may be more to this 9/11 story than we were being told. And you know what? C-SPAN did an article. They did an interview with Richard Gage, a very substantial interview. Now, whether Richard Gage is right or not, I don't know. Yeah. But why, if we have freedom of the press, that's supposed to be a mainstay of our government and our country, a value of our country is to look for truth and not to and not to trust government, but to really question government. Why? It's so perverse. Everything is perverse. But the point I'm making is that people can make a difference. Individuals can make a difference if they simply talk to their friends and they become active and write to their congressmen to the extent that they care to listen to their constituents. I guess they do a little bit yet when it comes voting time anyway, but people can become active and stand up for what they know is right or search for truth, and little by little it can make a difference. I mean, this is what Ron Paul has done all his career, all his life, is essentially not looking for power, not looking for ways of self-aggrandizement, but basically to help people explore the truth and go back to the Constitution, which gives us our God-given rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I just think what you're doing, Daniel, at the Institute is so important, and I would suggest to our listeners, consider contributing to the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, because Daniel, I'll tell you, he does an extremely good job of getting a lot of information. Just go to the Institute's website and you'll see how much information is up there that I believe is very truthful, at least is searching for the truth. And Daniel lets it go where it has to go for the truth. And so if you're listening to this, you can make a difference. You can send in your contributions to the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity or other organizations that are searching for truth. So Daniel, I want to thank you very much for working and devoting yourself. I know you're not getting rich doing what you're doing. You're making a living. You're supporting your family, but no frills. I know you very well, and so I know.
I get lucky. I get to work for Ron Paul, though.
Well, that is true. To be next to that man, to be able to talk to him, I've held him in such high regard since I first met up with him many, many years ago. And I can remember telling him one time I used to publish his weekly column on my newsletter, and I told him in person once, I said, a lot of times don't even read him, I just put him up there because I've known him for so long that I know what he's going to say is in sync with what I believe, because what I believe is what the Constitution believes, and I don't have any problem knowing that what I put up from Ron Paul I'm going to be in agreement with. Now, I suppose there's around the fringes there would be a few things here and there I might not be in agreement with him on, but I remember he said, well, that might be dangerous. So in his humility, he said, so he's opening the door, question me about what I'm saying, and I'm sure, that's the spirit of truth, is to say, okay, show me the evidence, and that's the point. Why won't the United States show the evidence for their determined outcome already of this event and that event and lots of other events as well? Anything else, Daniel, today?
No, we'll see. The Ukrainian army seems to be defecting in hundreds over to Russia.
Wow.
So that's kind of interesting. So we'll see how this horrible battle continues.
Oh, that is important news. Well, thank you very much, Daniel, again for helping us understand what's really going on over there, and look forward to doing it again next week, hopefully.
Thank you so much, Jay.